The screech pierced through the quiet morning like a knife, startling everyone in the elegant townhouse. It wasn't the first time Nora's African grey parrot, Pepper, had made such an alarming sound, but something about this particular cry sent chills down her spine. "What's wrong, buddy?" Nora rushed to Pepper's cage, her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders as she moved. The parrot's feathers were ruffled, his intelligent eyes fixed on something, or someone, across the room. Pepper tilted his head. Then in a voice that wasn't his typical playful mimicry, he squawked, "Bad lady, hurt baby." Nora froze. Pepper had an extensive vocabulary, the result of living previously with an elderly linguistics professor who had meticulously trained him. But these weren't words she'd ever heard him use before, not in this urgent, almost desperate tone. Her eyes followed Pepper's gaze to where Victoria, their recently hired nanny, stood holding baby Leo. On the surface, Victoria appeared perfect, professionally dressed, excellent references always punctual. The couple had hired her when both Nora and her husband Eliot, prominent defense attorneys at rival firms, found themselves overwhelmed with demanding cases. "He's just being silly," Victoria said with a practiced smile, bouncing little Leo gently in her arms. "Birds can be so dramatic, can't they?" But something in Victoria's eyes didn't match her smile. Something cold, calculated. Nora might have dismissed it, might have laughed it off as another of Pepper's strange behaviors, if not for what happened next. As Victoria turned to take Leo to his room, her grip on the baby tightened ever so slightly. A tiny, almost imperceptible wince crossed Leo's face, and Pepper went wild, flapping his wings furiously against the bars of his cage. "Hurt baby, bad lady, look, look." "I think Pepper needs some quiet time," Victoria suggested smoothly. "All this noise isn't good for Leo. Perhaps we should move his cage to another room." "Perhaps," Nora replied carefully, her attorney's mind now fully alert, assessing the situation. "Let me take Leo for a bit. You must be tired after the long morning." A flash of annoyance crossed Victoria's face before she composed herself and handed over the baby. "Of course. I'll go prepare his bottle." As Victoria left the room, Nora examined her son carefully. There were no obvious signs of mistreatment, but Leo seemed unusually subdued in her arms. When she glanced up, she found Pepper watching her intently, unusually quiet now that Victoria had left the room. "What did you see, Pepper?" she whispered, but the parrot simply tilted his head, eyes still fixed on the doorway where Victoria had disappeared. That night, after Victoria had gone home and Leo was asleep, Nora mentioned the incident to Eliot as they sat in their home office reviewing case files. "It's probably nothing," Eliot said, his attention divided between their conversation and the brief he was drafting. "Pepper's always been protective of Leo. Remember how he squawked at my mother when she visited?" "This was different," Nora insisted, twirling a pen between her fingers, a habit from her courtroom days. "I've never heard him use those specific words before, and there was something about Victoria's reaction." Eliot finally looked up, his expression softening as he noticed the genuine concern on his wife's face. "What are you thinking? You've got that look, the one you get when you're cross-examining a witness who's hiding something." "I'm thinking we should set up a camera," Nora said decisively, "just to ease my mind." Eliot considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but let's be discreet about it. If there's nothing wrong, I'd hate to make Victoria feel like we don't trust her." The next day, Nora placed a small camera disguised as a clock on the bookshelf in the living room, positioning it to capture most of the space. She felt slightly guilty about the surveillance, but Pepper's unusual behavior had triggered her protective instincts. For several days, nothing seemed amiss. Victoria continued her duties, caring for Leo with apparent devotion. Pepper remained unusually quiet whenever the nanny was present, watching her every move with unnerving focus. Then came Thursday. Nora had an early court appearance, and Eliot was meeting a client for breakfast. Victoria arrived right on schedule, cooing over Leo as she took him from Nora's arms. "I should be back by 3, Nora said, gathering her briefcase. "Call if you need anything." "We'll be just fine," Victoria assured her with that same practiced smile. "Won't we, little one?" As Nora headed for the door, Pepper suddenly called out, "Nora, stay, Nora, watch." She hesitated, glancing back at the parrot. Victoria laughed lightly. "He's going to miss you." Such a clever bird. Reluctantly, Nora left, the sound of Pepper's increasingly frantic calls following her down the hallway. Her court appearance ended earlier than expected, and rather than returning to her office, Nora felt an inexplicable urge to go home. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia fueled by Pepper's behavior, but the feeling persisted. Quietly entering through the back door, Nora heard Victoria's voice coming from the living room. Her tone was entirely different from the gentle one she used when others were present. Harsh, impatient. "Stop crying, you're such a nuisance, just like your mother, always demanding attention." Nora froze, her heart pounding. She silently moved toward the living room, stopping just out of sight. "The plan is almost ready," Victoria continued, apparently speaking on the phone while bouncing a whimpering Leo roughly on her hip. "Once I get access to their accounts, yes, I know what to do with the baby. No one will suspect anything." The blood in Nora's veins turned to ice. She stepped into the doorway, locked eyes with Victoria, and said in the calm, measured voice she reserved for her most dangerous cross-examinations, "I think you should put my son down now." Victoria whirled around, nearly dropping Leo in her surprise. "Nora, I thought you were in court until 3. "Clearly," Nora replied, moving forward to take Leo from Victoria's arms. "What plan were you discussing just now? And what exactly were you planning to do with my baby?" "I don't know what you think you heard," Victoria stammered, her composure cracking. "I was just talking to my sister about a birthday surprise for my nephew." From his cage, Pepper let out a sound, a perfect imitation of Victoria's cold voice. "Once I get access to their accounts," Victoria's face contorted with rage. "That stupid bird. I told Eliot we should get rid of it weeks ago. It's unhygienic to have animals around babies." "Did you now?" Nora said softly, her attorney's mind cataloguing every inconsistency. "That's strange, because Eliot never mentioned that conversation to me, and he tells me everything." The standoff might have continued if not for the sound of the front door opening. Eliot's voice called out, "Hello, Nora? Are you home early?" Relief flooded through Nora. "In the living room," she called back, never taking her eyes off Victoria. As Eliot entered, his expression shifted from surprise to concern as he took in the tense scene. "What's going on?" Before Nora could answer, Pepper's voice rang out clear and precise. "Bad lady plans money. Bad lady hurts Leo. Check phone." Victoria lunged for her purse, but Eliot was faster. A brief struggle ensued, ending with the contents of her bag spilling across the hardwood floor. Among the scattered items were several prescription bottles, a small notebook and a burner phone. Eliot picked up the notebook, his face growing pale as he flipped through it. "Bank account numbers, our schedules, notes about Leo's care." His voice hardened. "And what appears to be dosage calculations for various sedatives." Victoria's facade completely crumbled. She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You lawyers think you're so clever, don't you? Always too busy with your important cases to notice what's happening right under your noses." "What were you planning?" Nora demanded, holding Leo protectively against her chest. "It was perfect," Victoria spat, all pretense gone. "I had access to everything, your home, your baby, your accounts. The plan was simple. Make the baby sick slowly, just enough to worry you but not enough to raise suspicion. While you were distracted with his declining health, I would handle your finances, your bills, your accounts." "Handle our accounts," Eliot repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your signatures weren't hard to forge," Victoria continued with disturbing pride. "And grieving parents rarely check their bank statements carefully. By the time Leo's condition became critical, I would have transferred enough money to disappear completely." The sound of Leo whimpering cut through the room. Nora tightened her hold on him, maternal fury mixing with cold professional calculation. "How many times?" she demanded. "How many times did you hurt my baby?" Victoria's silence was damning. Pepper, however, had more to reveal. "Night medicine, bad medicine, show them." Nora's eyes narrowed. "What is he talking about?" "The cabinet," Eliot said suddenly, remembering Pepper's earlier warnings. He dropped to his knees, reaching under the kitchen cabinet nearby. His hand emerged with shards of dark glass, still wet with an unknown liquid. "What was in this bottle?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Before Victoria could respond, the front door opened again. They heard a familiar voice, Harriet, Nora's sister, who lived nearby and often dropped in unannounced. "Hello? Anyone home? I brought those files you asked for, Nora." Victoria took advantage of the distraction, making a sudden move toward the door, but Eliot blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere." As Harriet entered the living room with her young daughter, Amy, she immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" In a moment of unexpected clarity, Amy walked over to Pepper's cage. "What's wrong, Pepper?" she asked innocently. Pepper, who had always had a soft spot for the child, spoke softly but clearly. "Bad lady hurt Leo, help phone." Amy's eyes widened. Unlike the adults who might dismiss the parrot's warnings as random chatter, she took his words seriously. "Mom," she said, turning to Harriet, "I think something bad is happening." The room fell silent as Harriet took in the scene, Victoria's barely contained rage, the spilled contents of her purse, the dark glass in Eliot's hand, and the protective way Nora held Leo. "Amy," Harriet said calmly, though her eyes never left Victoria, "why don't you call Uncle Jack? Use my phone. It's in my purse by the door." Jack, Harriet's husband, was a detective with the local police. Victoria's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal as she realized her plan was unraveling completely. As Amy left to make the call, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to help. Save it for the police." Eliot cut her off, his voice ice-cold. "The evidence speaks for itself." From his cage, Pepper watched the scene unfold, his intelligent eyes fixed on Victoria. In that moment, Nora realized that without her feathered companion's persistent warnings, she might never have discovered the danger lurking in their home until it was too late. As sirens approached in the distance, Victoria's expression changed to one of calculated resignation. "You think this is over?" she said quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. This was just the beginning. The cryptic threat hung in the air as blue and red lights began to flash through the windows. But what did Victoria mean? Was there more to this plot than a simple scheme to steal from a wealthy family? And how had Pepper known to raise the alarm when no one else suspected anything was wrong? As Jack led Victoria away in handcuffs, these questions remained unanswered, casting a shadow over what should have been a moment of relief. The danger might have been removed from their home, but Nora couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of a much deeper conspiracy. One thing was certain. Pepper, the unexpected guardian, had saved Leo's life with his persistent warnings. And as the parrot settled quietly on his perch, watching the family with those knowing eyes, Nora made a silent promise to never again ignore her feathered friend's attempts to communicate, no matter how strange they might seem. Little did she know that Pepper's role as protector was far from over, and that the worst was yet to come. The days following Victoria's arrest brought a deceptive calm to Nora and Eliot's home. Leo was recovering well, the medical examination showing that while Victoria had administered mild sedatives, no permanent damage had been done. They had caught her scheme before she could fully implement her sinister plans. Pepper had become something of a household hero. The parrot received extra treats, and even Eliot, who had initially been skeptical of Nora's concerns, had developed a new appreciation for their feathered guardian. "I'll never doubt that bird again," he said one evening, as they watched Pepper interact gently with Leo, carefully plucking at the baby's socks to make him giggle. But while the immediate danger had passed, Victoria's final words continued to haunt Nora. This was just the beginning. What had she meant? Jack, Harriet's husband, stopped by to update them on the investigation. His normally cheerful face was grave as he settled into their living room, declining Nora's offer of coffee. "So we've been digging into Victoria's background," he explained, "and frankly nothing adds up. Her credentials, her references, even her identity, it's all fabricated." "Professional-grade forgeries," Eliot noted, his attorney's mind already analyzing the implications. Jack nodded. "Exactly. This isn't the work of one person." As if on cue, Pepper suddenly became agitated, hopping from foot to foot on his perch. "Phone in plant, he screeched, pointing his beak toward a decorative potted fern in the corner of the room. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his weapon as he approached the plant. Reaching deep into the soil, he pulled out a small burner phone, still warm, recently used. She must have hidden it during one of her shifts, Eliot realized, remembering how Victoria had insisted on rearranging the plants every few days, claiming they needed optimal light. The phone was quickly sealed in an evidence bag, but Pepper wasn't finished. More phones, home plant, office plant. Jack immediately dispatched officers to search all the planters in Nora and Eliot's home and offices. Each one yielded another hidden device. Victoria had been monitoring them far more extensively than anyone had realized. Meanwhile, in the police station's computer lab, tech experts were working to recover data from Victoria's devices, despite her attempts to wipe everything. What they found was chilling. "It's a complete surveillance operation," Jack explained when he returned later that evening. "She wasn't just monitoring your activities. She was gathering information about your colleagues, your clients. Everything about your lives was being catalogued and analyzed." "But why?" Nora asked, unconsciously holding Leo closer. "Why go to such lengths?" "Because you weren't the only targets," Jack replied grimly. "We've identified similar surveillance patterns at other law firms across the city. They're profiling legal professionals, attorneys, judges, legal aides, people with access to sensitive information and high-profile cases." Eliot's expression darkened as he processed this information. "They're looking for specific vulnerabilities, families where both parents work demanding hours, where they'd need to rely heavily on childcare." "Exactly," Jack confirmed, "and they're patient. They spend months gathering intelligence before making their move." Pepper, who had been listening intently, suddenly perked up. "Window. Look, window." Everyone turned to the living room window. In the building across the street, a figure quickly ducked out of sight. Jack immediately radioed for officers to search the building, but by the time they reached it, they found only an abandoned camera setup and a half-drunk cup of coffee, still warm. They were being watched. The discovery prompted immediate action. Jack arranged for police protection, but the incident had shaken everyone's sense of safety. That evening, as Leo slept peacefully in his new room, they had moved him to a more secure interior location. Nora watched Pepper standing guard. The parrot hadn't relaxed his vigilance for a moment. "You've been protecting him all along, haven't you?" she whispered. "Even before we knew there was danger." Pepper bobbed his head once, then spoke with unexpected clarity. "Family protect family." The simple statement brought tears to Nora's eyes. She reached out and gently stroked Pepper's feathers. "Yes, we do. And your family too." The investigation continued to expand. Jack had set up a command center in an unused conference room at the police station. Maps covered the walls, showing locations of similar cases, connected by red strings. Photos of suspected network members, most only partially glimpsed on security cameras, were grouped together, forming a shadowy organizational chart. But it was Amy, Harriet's observant daughter, who provided the most crucial breakthrough. Her childish drawings, faithfully recording her interactions with Pepper and her own observations during visits to Nora's home, contained details that might otherwise have been missed. "Look at this," Harriet said, pointing to one crayon sketch. "Amy drew this strange man who came to fix your door 3 weeks ago. She thought it was odd because he spent more time looking at Pepper than actually fixing anything." Jack quickly cross-referenced the date. "There was no scheduled maintenance that day. None of your regular services reported being in your neighborhood." "Someone was scouting the house," Eliot concluded grimly, "probably documenting security measures, escape routes." Jack's voice trailed off as he noticed Pepper's increasing agitation. The parrot was pacing on his perch, clearly distressed. "Coming soon, he warned. Before anyone could question what he meant, the lights flickered and went out. Emergency generators kicked in immediately, but in those few seconds of darkness, Pepper's warning took on a new urgency. They hear, he screeched, his eyes fixed on the door. Jack immediately radioed for backup, but the response was garbled. Someone was jamming their communications. In the confusion, a figure slipped into the room, moving with practiced efficiency. But Pepper was ready. The moment the intruder reached for Leo's crib, the parrot launched himself from his perch, wings spread wide, creating enough of a distraction for Eliot to tackle the would-be kidnapper. More officers rushed in, and the intruder was quickly subdued. When they removed the ski mask, everyone gasped. The face belonged to one of Victoria's references, a woman who had vouched for her credentials when they hired her. She was part of the network. "It's over," Jack declared, securing the suspect. "We've got her accomplice." But Pepper remained agitated. More coming." He was right. The power outage had been a coordinated effort. Security cameras caught glimpses of other figures converging on their location. The network was making its move, determined to silence Victoria's victims before she could expose them. What they hadn't counted on was Amy. The young girl had continued her habit of drawing everything she saw. She had noticed and recorded suspicious activities throughout the neighborhood. Cars that didn't belong, people lingering too long at bus stops, unusual patterns in local foot traffic. Thanks to her observations, the police were able to quickly identify and apprehend the infiltrators one by one. Each arrest revealed more about the network's operations, but the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The burner phone found in the plant had created a hidden backup, automatically uploading data to a secure server. The virus they'd discovered on Victoria's devices had been a smokescreen designed to make the network think their tracks were covered. Victoria, it turned out, had been playing both sides. While working for the criminal network, she had also been gathering evidence against them, building her own insurance policy. When cornered, she had activated the backup, ensuring that if she went down, she wouldn't go down alone. The final confrontation came at dawn. The network's leadership, realizing their operation was compromised, made one last desperate attempt to contain the situation. But they had underestimated the power of a family united in protection of their youngest member. Pepper, ever vigilant, spotted the final intruder, the network's leader attempting to access the house through a service entrance. His warning allowed the police to set up a perfect ambush, and the mastermind behind the operation was finally captured. In the aftermath, the full scope of the network's activities came to light. They had been operating for years, targeting wealthy families across the country. Victoria's detailed records, combined with Amy's drawings and Pepper's testimony, carefully translated and documented, provided enough evidence to dismantle the entire organization. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came during the interrogation of the network's leader. Victoria hadn't just been gathering evidence as insurance. She had been a former victim herself. Years ago, she had been approached by the network after they identified her financial troubles and promised her a way out. Instead, they had trapped her in their scheme, threatening her own family if she didn't cooperate. Her plan had been not just to steal from Nora and Eliot, but to gather enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. Her methods had been unconscionable, putting Leo at risk, but her motives had been more complex than simple greed. In her own twisted way, she had been trying to break free from the very network she served. As Nora sat in their living room, processing this information, Pepper flew to her shoulder, gently preening her hair, as he often did when she was upset. "Good bird," she whispered, reaching up to stroke his feathers. "The very best bird." But even as Victoria and her colleagues were taken into custody, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something they were missing. The scale of the operation, the resources they had access to, there had to be more to the story. Somewhere out there were the other families who had been targeted by this network, possibly unaware of how close they had come to disaster. And at the center of it all was Pepper, the unexpected hero whose vigilance had not only saved Leo, but had helped expose a criminal enterprise that had operated in the shadows for far too long. The rain began to fall outside, washing away the last traces of the night's events. But the questions it left behind would take much longer to clear. Nora looked at the evidence board Jack had set up, knowing there were still pieces missing from this puzzle. Pepper made a soft questioning sound, and Nora realized he was mimicking Leo's cry again, but this time it seemed more like a question. Where did they go from here? How many others had been unwittingly drawn into this twisted scheme? The answers would come soon enough, but they would bring with them a whole new set of challenges that nobody, not Nora, not Eliot, not even clever Pepper, could have anticipated. The courthouse was filled to capacity as Victoria took the stand. After months of investigation, the trial of what the media had dubbed the nanny network had become a national sensation. Nora sat beside Eliot in the gallery, Pepper secure in a special carrier at her feet. The judge had made an unprecedented exception, allowing the Parrot to attend, given his crucial role in the case. Victoria looked different now. Gone was the polished, confident nanny who had charmed her way into their lives. In her place was a woman worn down by the weight of her actions and the years of manipulation she had endured. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Victoria James," she replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Though that wasn't always my name." What followed was a testimony that revealed the full extent of the network's operation. It had begun years ago as a simple fraud scheme: identify wealthy families, infiltrate their homes through childcare positions, and systematically drain their accounts. But over time, it had evolved into something more insidious. The leader, Marcus Reeves, realized that attorneys, judges, and other legal professionals had access to more than just money, Victoria explained. They had information, sensitive case details, witness protection locations, sealed indictments. That information was valuable to certain clients. The revelation sent murmurs through the courtroom. This wasn't just about money, it was about compromising the justice system itself. "And your role in all this?" the prosecutor asked. Victoria's eyes found Nora's across the courtroom. "I was recruited after my own family was targeted. My husband was an accountant for a prominent judge. When the network was done with us, he was in prison for embezzlement he didn't commit, and I was left with nothing. Marcus offered me a choice: work for him or face the same fate." "But you began collecting evidence against them," the prosecutor prompted. "Yes," Victoria admitted, "but I went too far. I convinced myself that the end justified the means, that harming one child to bring down the network would save many others. I was wrong. I became what I hated." Her gaze shifted to Pepper, who watched her with those intelligent eyes. "I didn't count on the Parrot. In all our planning, all our surveillance, we never considered that a bird would be the one to expose us." As the trial continued, more details emerged. The network had operated in 12 states, targeting over 50 families. They had accumulated millions in stolen funds and sold sensitive information to criminal enterprises across the country. High-profile cases had been compromised, witnesses endangered, and lives ruined. Back at home, Nora and Eliot had begun to rebuild their sense of security. New security systems were installed, backgrounds were checked and double-checked, and most importantly, they adjusted their schedules to spend more time with Leo. Pepper had become a local celebrity. News outlets wanted interviews, which Nora politely declined, and the neighborhood children would stop by just to say hello to the hero Parrot. Through it all, Pepper remained unchanged, watchful, protective, and utterly devoted to his family. One evening, as Nora was reviewing case files in the living room, Jack stopped by with news. "We found something interesting on Marcus's personal computer," he said, settling into an armchair. "A file labeled Contingencies, with detailed instructions for network members in case of exposure." "What kind of instructions?" Eliot asked, looking up from where he was playing with Leo on the floor. "Mostly protocols for destroying evidence, establishing new identities, that sort of thing," Jack explained. "But there was one section specifically about your family. Marcus seemed particularly concerned about Pepper." Nora glanced at the Parrot, who was preening his feathers nearby. "Why would he single out Pepper?" "Because of who Pepper belonged to before you," Jack replied. "His previous owner, the linguistics professor." "Professor Thomas Grant?" Nora nodded. "What about him?" "He wasn't just a linguistics professor. Before his academic career, Grant worked for the government, developing protocols for witness protection. He was an expert in spotting deception and reading non-verbal cues." "And he trained Pepper," Eliot said slowly, the implications becoming clear. Jack nodded. "Grant didn't just teach Pepper words, he taught him to recognize patterns of behavior, signs of stress, deception, aggression, particularly toward children. After his wife died, Grant devoted his life to developing tools to protect vulnerable populations. Pepper was one of those tools," Nora realized, looking at the Parrot with newfound understanding. The ultimate silent witness, Jack confirmed. Grant must have known what he was creating. According to his colleagues, he always said Pepper was his greatest achievement, but no one understood why. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't just luck that had brought Pepper into their lives. Professor Grant, in his final days, had arranged for Pepper to be adopted by a family he felt might need such protection, a family with connections to the legal world where his skills would be most valuable. As the trial neared its conclusion, Victoria made one final request: to speak privately with Nora and Eliot. Against their better judgment, but with Jack's support, they agreed. The meeting took place in a secure room at the courthouse with Jack present. Victoria, handcuffed and dressed in prison orange, looked small and tired. "I wanted to say something that shouldn't be part of the official record," she began. "What I did was unforgivable. I won't ask for your forgiveness, but there's something you should know about your parrot." "We know about Professor Grant," Nora said. "We know what Pepper was trained to do." Victoria shook her head. "It's more than that. When I was first assigned to your family, I was given a specific warning about Pepper. Marcus was particularly concerned about him, more than any security system or potential witness. Now, I understand why." She leaned forward slightly. "There are others like me out there, people forced into the network, people looking for a way out. I've provided authorities with a list of names, but there are some I couldn't identify. They'll need protection when they come forward." "What are you suggesting?" Eliot asked warily. "Professor Grant didn't just create one tool, as you put it," Victoria replied. "There are others, parrots, dogs, even cats he trained before his death, each placed with families at risk, each watching, waiting to sound the alarm if needed." The implication was clear. Professor Grant had created a network of his own, a counter to the very threat that had targeted Nora and Eliot, not just for their family, but for others who might face similar dangers. "Why tell us this?" Nora asked. "Because when this is over, when I'm serving my sentence, those animals and their families will still need protection," Victoria said simply. "Marcus had allies who won't be caught in this sweep, people who might seek revenge." "And you think we can help?" Eliot's tone was skeptical. "I think Pepper can," Victoria replied. "He recognized what I was before anyone else did. He can help identify the others, both the threats and the protectors." The revelation was almost too much to process. What had begun as a simple case of a nanny with sinister intentions had expanded to reveal layers of conspiracy, counter-conspiracy, and a lingering threat that might never fully disappear. As they left the meeting, Nora felt overwhelmed by the responsibility Victoria had placed on them. Could they really take on the task of helping to protect other families, of continuing Professor Grant's work? The answer came that evening as they sat in their living room, the space now feeling safe again despite all that had happened. Leo played on his blanket, giggling as Pepper carefully dropped colored blocks for him to grab. The parrot's movements were gentle, his watchful eyes missing nothing. "What do you think?" Nora asked Eliot. "About what Victoria said." Eliot watched Pepper interact with their son. "I think we already know the answer," he said quietly. "Pepper saved our family. If there are others out there who need the same protection, how can we turn our backs on them?" Pepper looked up at the sound of his name, tilting his head as if understanding the weight of the conversation. "Family protect family," he said, repeating the phrase that had become something of a mantra. Nora smiled. "Yes, but family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the bonds we forge through trust, protection, and love. Sometimes those bonds come from unexpected places." "Like a parrot who refuses to stay silent in the face of danger," Eliot added with a smile. The final day of the trial brought the closure they had all been seeking. Marcus Reeves and his key lieutenants received lengthy sentences, while Victoria and others who had cooperated were given reduced terms. The stolen funds were traced and returned, and the compromised cases were being carefully reviewed to ensure justice was properly served. As they left the courthouse for the last time, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Nora and Eliot moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, Pepper's carrier held securely between them. One persistent reporter managed to get close enough to ask, "What are you going to do now that it's all over?" Nora exchanged a glance with Eliot before answering, "We're going to go home and be a family," she said simply, "and we're going to help others do the same." In the months that followed, they worked with Jack and a select team to identify other families who might have been targeted, as well as the animals Professor Grant had trained to protect them. It was delicate work, often frustrating, but each success, each family warned, each potential threat neutralized, made it worthwhile. Leo grew into a happy, healthy child, with no memory of those dangerous days. The story of Pepper, the parrot who saved him, became a cherished family legend told and retold as he grew older. Nora and Eliot made significant changes to their lives. They adjusted their career paths to allow more time at home. And when they did need outside help, they implemented rigorous verification processes. But more importantly, they learned to trust their instincts and to listen to those who showed genuine care for their family, especially those with feathers. Pepper remained their faithful guardian, his watchful eyes never wavering in their protection of the family he loved. His warnings had not only saved Leo, but had exposed a criminal network and led to changes in how the legal system protected its own. And so their story became one of hope, proof that even in our darkest moments, heroes can emerge from unexpected places and love can triumph over evil, as long as we have the courage to listen and act when warnings come our way. One quiet evening, as the family gathered in their living room, Leo, now old enough to understand, asked Pepper a question that had been on his mind since hearing the full story for the first time. "Were you scared, Pepper, when you were trying to tell everyone about Victoria?" Pepper considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness before responding with words he had heard Nora say, "Courage not know fear. Courage act despite fear." Nora and Eliot exchanged a smile. Professor Grant had certainly taught Pepper well, but the parrot had also learned from them, absorbing not just words but values, courage, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for those who cannot protect themselves. As night fell, Pepper settled on his perch near Leo's room, maintaining his vigilant watch even though the danger had long passed. Some habits, formed in love and protection, never fade, and if sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, Pepper still made his rounds of the house, checking windows and doors, no one minded. They understood that for Pepper, as for all of them, the lesson had been clear. True security comes not from locks and alarms, but from the watchful care of those who love us. In a world that sometimes seemed dark and frightening, Pepper remained a beacon of hope, a reminder that heroes can come in all forms, that family is defined by love rather than blood, and that sometimes the most powerful act is simply to speak up when we witness injustice. As Leo drifted off to sleep under Pepper's watchful gaze, the parrot softly repeated the words that had come to define their journey. Family, protect family. And in that simple truth, they had found their peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.